He's the former president and publisher of the Sun Herald, and now he's on the radio. Welcome to Coast View with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome back to Coast View. As I mentioned in the first, at the beginning of the first segment that we just had with Kent Nico, what a terrific conversation! What a great leader he is of Memorial Hospital at Gulfport, and really doing a great job. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, I wanted to share kind of a personal message with you today about the events that's happening, around the country. I think a lot of people, friend to friend. Within families, people are having conversations about how their eyes have been opened to what Republican from Louisiana Mike Johnson calls the need for authentic reconciliation, that we are all ultimately created equal. Mike Johnson actually has two sons, and one is an African-American adopted son. And so he's in a really good position. And one of the things he said this morning is that he can't with confidence say that both of his sons have an opportunity to do whatever they want to do in their lives going forward, that there may be some limitations for his black son. And so, this is a time for a lot of reflection and no different for me, the conversations that I'm having with my family. And my son, Justin, who I want to introduce you to now. Justin, you can bring him in, Kyle. Hey, Justin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dad. How are y'all?
Good. So Justin, he went to St. James Elementary, went to St. Patrick's High School, went on to Auburn University, and then from there he went to work for Pricewaterhouse in Houston and New York. He really works all over the country, and he's got his southern friends from Auburn. He's got his other friends that are from literally all points of the United States. And then he spent a considerable amount of time down in South America and in Europe. Lived the summer in Spain learning Spanish. And he really has friends literally all over the world. And so it's been interesting talking to Justin about the conversations that he's had with himself, and of course the conversations that he and I have, but also the conversations he's having with his friends. Why this situation that we just dealt with George Floyd's brutal death being different. And I just thought it would be helpful to share the conversations that we've been having. So with that, Justin, I'm just curious, why don't you, I don't know where the best place to start, but why don't you share why you think this is different?
Yeah, I think the video of Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck was so graphic and so undisputably bad and evil that it opened a lot of people's eyes to, okay, wait, if this situation happened and if this is unrefutably a bad thing, then, what happened to all these other cases with police brutality or white people killing black people? What happened in these situations? And have I been right to think that maybe it was just a bad apple, or maybe that there was just small pockets of racism in small parts of the country, but it's not really a big issue? Was I right? And I think the answer to that question is no, and that this has been a longstanding issue in our country. And I think that for people my age, first of all, seeing the video is one thing, but then seeing the reaction after the video, and seeing and hearing so many stories of oppression and racism from our friends and from friends of friends, and having so much access to so much content on the subject, I think it's completely changed the conversation and opened the eyes to a lot of people who have had, quite frankly, the privilege of ignoring it for so long, to how bad the problem really is. And I think that's why this is ultimately different, and ultimately, I think, hopefully, a time of great change, is because there's so much information out there, and so it's so easily accessible to so many people, especially my age.
So one of the things you said to me early on is that, given the way you were raised, you maybe didn't see the problem the way that it's being, the way that you're seeing it today. Talk more about that.
Yeah, obviously, you and Mom did a great job of raising my brother and sister and I to be not racist at all. We were taught really not to see race very much when we saw other people, and to really judge people for who they are, not what they look like. And I was very proud of that for my I'm still very proud of that I was raised that way. But what I realized in this situation is that not being racist is not enough. And to say that you don't see color or that, you don't judge people by their race is really, in a way, something that only white people can say, because black people in this country live by the reality that people judge them all the time for their race and what they look like. So in a lot of ways, it's not enough to not be racist. You really have to take a forcible stance and say, I'm going to be an anti-racist, and I'm going to actively work to change the way people think about race. And ultimately, lead us a little bit towards that vision that we've always had for our country, that everybody's equal.
Yeah, I remember, I told you the story of David Francis, my dear friend in New Orleans, who was the first black African-American publisher of the Times-Picayune, and I was proud to promote him to that position. He's such a dear friend, and we had this discussion once about racial profiling, and he said, you can't have racial profiling, and here's the reason why. And he explained it to me, and he ultimately talked to me about the conversations that he had to have with his kids, that if they get pulled over, they can't take their hands off the steering wheel and they can't make any sudden moves. And then he looks at me and he says, you haven't had that conversation with your kids, have you? And I thought, wow, I haven't. So, it's, when you think about it in those contexts, you think about what Mike Johnson said today, the Republican from Louisiana who has an African-American son and a white son, it hits you that we can't be in a place in America where we have different conversations with our kids. And we never, there was never a need for us to have that conversation, was there, Justin?
No, and it's kind of interesting too, because I remember you telling me that story of David and his conversation with his kids, probably, whenever you were in New Orleans, so 5, 6, 7 years ago. And that was the first time I really realized how different things really were. But it just kind of took a back seat. And then, I went to work for PwC, and it's a super diverse, super accepting, super inclusive firm, which, to be fair, we still have a lot of work to do as well. But going into PwC and being exposed to people from different backgrounds and being exposed to the importance of diversity inclusion, you started to learn a lot. But then when George Floyd happens, is like it kind of hits. It's similar to how we talk about COVID, where you have these like decade-long trends that are leading up to change, and then COVID happens, everybody's forced to change really quickly, go virtual and all these different things. I think similarly with George Floyd, a lot's been happening over the past, decade, 2 decades, and really the history of our country, but it all just kind of came to a point now where we have to address it and where it can't take a backseat anymore. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so I hear that, and I say that on the show all the time, that trends that were in place prior to this economic disaster, I said this before Katrina, after Katrina, whatever those trends were before Katrina, that after Katrina they were going to be sped up. So whether it's a business or whether it's societal issues, these issues are going to be sped up. And I think, there was this inflection point in America that COVID sort of created, and then the George Floyd thing happened, and it gave people an opportunity to focus. And something really profound happened that meant that this is a different situation now, and we're going to seek reforms. And I've said on the show many times that, part of it's just about creating a crack in the consciousness of people who maybe didn't understand what this was all about, and getting them to open their minds and their heart and just think about it and talk about it. Some of this is about reforms and the way criminal justice system works. There are economic reforms that probably can be made. There are some short-term things, some intermediate, and some long-term things. We're not going to solve America's problems today, but one of the things we can do is just start the process, and the beginning of the process, just opening people's hearts. One of the things that really, well, actually, it didn't surprise me about the conversations that you're having with your friends is how much you're talking about it. So tell me, is there a difference between the conversations with, say, your New York friends than, say, your Auburn buddies that you stay so close with?
It's kind of interesting because you would imagine those conversations are probably pretty different for the majority of issues in the country. But with this one, they're so interestingly similar. My friends from, all parts of the South, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, we're all having these conversations, and it's amazing to see how unified people are on it. Some people may not fully understand the issue of racism and systematic racism and, the kind of micro and macro effects of that. And truthfully, I'm still got a long way to go before I really understand it, or you're even close to understanding, what the Black experience in this country really is. But it's interesting to see how unified people are to going on that journey and to understand and to say, man, things are like when I saw, like, a perfect example, when we saw Colin Kaepernick kneeling,
Hey, Justin, let's do Justin, let's do this. Let's do this. We're coming to the end of this segment. Let's pick it up from there, and we'll continue the conversation. So this is my son, Justin Mathews, and we're just sort of revealing the conversations that he and I have been having about this situation. We'll see you after the break.
You can also listen live to SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1 on your Amazon Alexa devices. Once you've enabled the skill, just say, Alexa, open SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast.
Talking to the people that help make the coast such a unique place to live. This is Coast View with Ricky Mathews on SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1.
Welcome back to Coast View. I'm so privileged and honored to have my son, Justin Mathews, with me today. He works for PricewaterhouseCoopers. He is a graduate from Auburn, and we're just talking about the conversations, the deep, personal, and important conversations that we've been having between the two of us. And one day we just said, why don't we share that with people? And that's why we're here. So, this is all from the heart. But before we left, you were talking about having conversations with your friends, and you were starting to mention about Kaepernick kneeling. And why don't you continue from there?
Yeah, really, it can be summed up this way. I mean, when we saw Cap kneeling a couple years ago, I think a lot of us, especially us from the South and, people who are super patriotic, were like, how could you disrespect the national anthem or the flag? And then I remember seeing days after George Floyd's death, the side-by-side of Kaepernick kneeling and George Floyd kneeling. And Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd. And then it hit me that in a lot of ways we really missed the boat, and that instead of addressing the issue and the elephant in the room of police brutality and systematic racism and true racial inequality, we changed the conversation. And in doing that, we didn't lead to change. And now George Floyd died because of it, not to mention the countless others who weren't caught on film. So that's the kind of conversations we're having of like, okay, this time there is no more missing the boat. This time it's got to change. And that starts by doing exactly what we're doing, just talking about it.
So what you said, that your conversations with your friends from the North are surprisingly the same as your friends from the South, because are they all sort of having that same kind of awakening? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, this is not a political issue. This is not a Northern or Southern issue. At the end of the day, this is, I think, one of the most human and American issues there is right now in the world. And that there's still places in this country and spread in this country don't see people as people, and people judge people by the color of their skin and what they look like. And that leads to a lot of different implications, but one of them being black people dying at the hands of police officers. So it's great because the conversation is getting politicized in certain environments and by certain people. But at the end of the day, the base problem that we need to fix, I think people are addressing it no matter what background you come from or what political party you associate yourself with.
So you've developed 4 or 5 items that can help, that are commitments that you make that I think would be good to share with the audience. Why don't you go through your list?
Yeah, I think, just conversations that I've had with my friends, both black and white, and other people around the country, I think there's a couple things we can do to really address the issue within ourselves first and foremost, and then kind of look outside. So I think number one is we've got to address our own bias, the biases that we have consciously and the biases that we have maybe unconsciously. What are the things that we're doing that are considered, microaggressions where, maybe we grip our bag a little closer if we walk by a black person, or maybe we cross the street, or maybe we get out of the elevator. These little things that maybe we're even subconsciously doing that are really hurtful to people who don't look like us. So I think that's number one, is like, let's address ourselves and make sure that we're in a place where we don't have any prejudice in our hearts. Then I think from there, we need to seek to learn and to understand the issue. Because at the end of the day, this isn't a one police officer thing. This isn't a police force thing. This is a America thing. And I think the two best ways to do that, to like really learn and understand, I think one is taking a macro look and looking at the history of our country. I mean, you think about, like, just to throw some dates out there, 1607, first colony is formed, 1619, first slaves reach America. It's literally 12 years before the first slaves came here. And then in 1776, we became a country, and in there, we promised that every man is created equal, certain inalienable rights. And the irony is, at that point, there was slavery widespread in the colonies. And it wasn't until 1865 that slavery was abolished. So literally for 246 years, Black people weren't looked as citizens, they were looked as property. And then for 99 years after that, you had Jim Crow and legal segregation and disenfranchisement and all these laws in place that were literally making Black people second-class citizens. And it wasn't until 1964, think about that, Dad, 1964, 56 years ago, that legally Black people were the same. Not to mention the cultural things that were in effect, the long-standing systems that were in effect. So for 84% of America's history, 84%, Black people have been either enslaved or ostracized. So we've got to address that. We've got to understand that if we contextualize the moment that we're in today and the history of the whole U.S., that you start to understand why there's so much pain and sorrow and anger within certain communities in our country. So I think that's step one. And then step two is hearing the stories, like David Francis's story. And there's so many videos out there of parents telling their kids how to approach conversations with police officers because they're afraid that they're going to be seen as dangerous. So I think learning and understanding the issue is the second thing. We got to first address our own things and then look outside and start learning about really what the issue is. And then the next, we got to stand up and we got to say, look, to my Black brothers and sisters, I'm sorry. I did not understand this issue. And quite frankly, I had the privilege of not having to understand the issue because this issue didn't affect me. I wasn't looked at differently because of my skin color. And, and then say, but now I get it. Now I finally understand, and I'm here to learn. I don't fully understand. I don't fully get it, but I'm open to learning and to understanding what your experience is and how I can play a part in that. So just saying, I'm with you and showing solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters in this country. And then, I think from there, you just have to have the conversations, like have the tough conversations with your white friends, with your Black friends. There's a great web series going around right now with Emmanuel Ocho, the legendary football player for Texas. He's a sports commentator now. And he's having these conversations called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And he's just talking about the Black experience. And this morning he released a new video with him and Matthew McConaughey having a conversation about what it's like to be Black in America. And it's uncomfortable, yeah, but I think it's good to be uncomfortable in this situation. We need to be uncomfortable. We need to force ourselves out of our comfort zone and understand this issue if we really want to see change. And then, of course, publicly and privately have these conversations. Like you and I, multiple mornings over the past 2 weeks, over our cup of coffee in the living room, have been talking about this stuff. So, like, obviously now this is a little bit more of a public way of doing things. But even privately, call your friends up, talk to them about what's going on, talk to your family about it over the dinner table. Post on social media about it. I posted a random article that I saw about microaggressions and just educating people on what it is and how to fix it. And one of my buddies messaged me. He was like, hey, man, I'd never heard of this before. This was super helpful, and I didn't even realize I was doing this until now. So it's like these small little things, the conversations publicly, privately, with Black and white people, and really just getting uncomfortable and saying that's okay to be uncomfortable. And then ultimately, I think we just need to start looking at each other with a whole lot more love and empathy. Actually, very fittingly, the Bible verse of the day today that popped up was 1 Peter 4:8. Above all, let your love for one another be intense, because love covers a multitude of sins. What a perfect quote for this situation. Obviously, there's a lot of sins in America, in the history of our country, that we're looking to overcome right now. And ultimately, I think the only way we're going to do that is if we lead with love and lead with empathy and try to understand what, our fellow Americans are going through, and then say, you know what, let's get through this together.
So, Justin, thank you so much for sharing that with me. We're with the audience, those conversations that we've been having. And I hope this helped. We're at the end of our time together, but, hopefully it resonates with some people. Not everyone's going to agree, but I think it's important to have the conversation. So God bless you. I'm very proud of you, son.
And if do we have enough time? One little quote.
One more quote. Yes.
All right. So this is from Langston Hughes, a great poem that he wrote. It's called "Let America Be America Again." And this little portion really stuck out to me. It said, "Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free." It's amazing when you look back and you see our founders. They had this idea that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that every man are created equal. And still today, we're fighting these things. So it's a message of hope to say, hey, we're working to get there and to really fulfill the potential of this country. But we've got a lot of work to do, and that starts within ourselves, for sure.
Thank you, son. God bless you.
Thanks, Dad.
Follow SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast 103.1 on Facebook. Facebook.com/SuperTalk MS Coast 103.1.